This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Bonjour, my name is Alice, welcome back to my channel. A few weeks ago I was kind of lost on the internet and I found this video that I wanted to show you. It's a collection of street interviews conducted in 1975. The question was very simple: do you know that women get beaten up? Or do you know any battered women? And this is what these men answered.
Savez-vous qu'il y a en France, en ce moment, des femmes battues?
Ça, je l'ignore totalement, mais il y en a certainement eu depuis toujours. Depuis le monde, les femmes mènent le monde, justement.
Je pense que c'est ce qu'il faut s'attendre des relations entre les êtres humains, non?
Des femmes battues, c'est surprenant.
Des femmes battues, j'en connais pas.
Et si je vous disais que moi je bats ma femme, pour qu'elle soit plus gentille et plus amoureuse de moi, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Et vous, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
J'en pensais que si, mettons, moi si je veux taper ma femme, je suis sûr qu'elle fera mieux l'amour.
C'est le résultat du vieux statut patriarcal de l'homme, enfin, que... Il y a là un droit qui paraît une évidence à beaucoup de gens et qui sont tout à fait incapables de remettre en question les relations réelles de l'homme et de la femme et de s'apercevoir que la femme aussi est une personne.
As I said, this video was published in 1975 and I remember the first time I watched it that I was struck by how familiar those types of answers sounded. So we had the guy that basically says that women rule the world. It was only 10 years after married women were allowed to have their own bank account and work without their husband's consent. Then you have those who say that they are not aware of the fact that women get beaten up. I don't do that. And then you have the intellectual that casually explains that women are human beings and should be treated as such. Now this interview is what is called a man on the street interview. I'm not teaching you anything. It is a genre, a feature of the world of journalism that is deeply appreciated because it allows the audience to get an idea of what average people, like the ones watching TV, the ones reading the newspapers, what those people think. The spontaneity of the interview is supposed to ensure that what the interviewee says is authentic. They didn't get a chance to really think about the question and their answer, like that man who was seen 3.5 million times saying on TV that he has slapped his wife in the face several times. He probably later regretted being so open about it. Street interviews are meant to break the verticality of journalism with, the journalist and experts telling you what you're supposed to think about this or that event. So it makes sense that this genre of videos has exploded on social media, which are supposed to give a voice to everybody, to be a sort of public forum. I honestly can't go on YouTube or any other social media platforms without being recommended street interviews. I enjoy watching some of them because I believe it is interesting to hear what apolitical people think about a given topic, but at the same time, I always take what is said with a grain of salt. Why? Because how can one person's lived experience be representative of any general truth? Have you ever heard about the Dunning-Kruger effect? It's a cognitive bias whereby people with low ability, expertise, or experience regarding a type of task or area of knowledge tend to overestimate their ability or knowledge. When the guy in the 1975 street interview I showed you earlier said, "Women rule the world," well, he's doing the thing. He's overestimating his knowledge on a topic he's quite ignorant about. On the other hand, those who are quite knowledgeable on a given topic tend to underestimate themselves because they understand how demanding it is to be an expert. The Dunning-Kruger effect could be summed up in two sentences. The first one is, the more you know that you don't know. Socrates said it himself, quote, "All I know is that I know nothing." And the second sentence could be, the less you know that you don't know. The Dunning-Kruger effect makes so much sense when you look at street interviews on YouTube, social media in general, because those interviews are full of people who overestimate their knowledge on this or that topic, because what is important is not accuracy, but rather the production of content, provocative, clickbait content, conveyed with enough confidence. Now, it is interesting to know about the Dunning-Kruger effect, but it doesn't change anything to the fact that street interviews have something experts who write for PubMed, Routledge or Oxford handbook collections don't have. They appeal to emotions, surprise, anger, joy, sadness. In turn, the emotional response of viewers is what gives the content legitimacy. When you hear something that sounds right, that sounds true, something that generates a strong emotion of validation or rejection, you'll want to turn that emotion into a like, a comment. Now, the more people share that same emotional response, the more likes and comments the post will get, and the more it appears legitimate. Now, that's precisely what people mean when they use the phrase common sense. Common sense does not require an in-depth analysis of a given topic with facts and stats. It just sounds right. Some have turned common sense into a political agenda. They purposely put facts on the side to promote their own vision of the world. As an example, far-right candidates often turn to common sense to compensate for the shortcomings in their political programs. They'll use what we call in France faits divers, meaning news that can trigger a strong emotional response, like, let's say, a young white girl murdered by an Algerian woman, or a police officer severely injured by a protester. So things that are quite unusual, let's be honest, to make generalizations and establish their truth. Essayist Susan Sontag dedicated an entire essay to the way images and videos can be misused. She defines the image as something that takes complex situations and simplifies them into something that can be consumed in an instant. She did not reject images and videos as means of communication and information, but she made sure that they were backed with actual facts. My social media feed is full of videos of wildfires, of typhoons, so natural catastrophes that create a strong emotional response, namely fear. But those images, that emotional response is legitimate because there are facts, there are studies to prove that what is happening is real, is the result of climate change, and that we need to do something about it. So to sum it up, street interviews rely on spontaneity, strong emotions, and common people knowledge to establish the truth. It is based on the idea that each individual has an almost innate, therefore unbiased capacity to understand what is right and what is wrong. So that's one way of understanding the world we live in, through images and individual experiences. However, the reason why we have evolved to become what we are today is that we have developed ways of knowing that put the individual experience into perspective. The scientific method is one example of that. But scientific research is not the only way of knowing. Okay, imagine a scientist who goes out to tell a small farmer that this product, this pesticide, is scientifically proven to be the best product possible to get rid of parasites and ensure long-term improvements with crops. The farmer will certainly agree. I mean, look at all those graphs and numbers, they seem pretty legit. But he knows, by experience, that this type of product will make his land infertile in the matter of a decade, and so he refuses to use the pesticide. By doing so, he uses his expertise as owner of the land as an indicator of truth. All of that to say that without peer-reviewed scientific research, without expertise, we'd struggle to make sense of the world and ensure our long-term survival and development. So common sense, scientific research or expertise, well, some people believe there's another way to achieve truth, and that is debate. Debate merges scientific knowledge and emotion-based discourses. People like Ben Shapiro and debate pros in general have established a culture in which winning a debate equals being the possessor of truth. And I guess it makes sense in a way because the person who wins a debate is likely to have shown that the arguments of their opponent are wrong. But at the same time, there are so many elements that come into debating. The looks of the person, their gender, their level of self-confidence, how eloquent they sound. And because of all of that, the arguments put forward are sometimes neglected. In other words, debate culture is not always about being right, but rather about owning the other person. And also, it is still very centered on emotions. So, we started with street interviews and we ended up exploring the different ways in which people seek truth. A majority of people understand that science and expertise are the preferred path to achieve truth, but some still get caught by the emotional appeal of common-sense street interviews and spectacular debates. I mean, this sort of content perfectly fits with the demands of the attention economy. Left-wing critics or content, on the other hand, tend to push for a structural vision of society, detached from individual experiences, and that requires explanations, that requires time and effort, and taking a distance from one's emotions. In other words, it is not compatible with the attention economy. So the question now is, should we, as progressive people who want to convince others to join our causes, should we work with the attention economy, meaning with emotions and common sense? It's something I think about a lot, not street interviews, but the role of emotions in politics. In French, we'd use the term affect, to be affected by something. According to philosopher Spinoza, affect can increase or diminish one's capacity to act. By that he meant that throughout our lives, we are affected by human interactions that can empower us, that can be a productive conversation with a friend, a speech, or conversations, interactions that can make us feel worthless. That is, for example, bullying, being harassed by a boss, etc. Affects are really powerful, and when they are coupled with ideas, they can move mountains. French intellectual François Bégodeau came to the conclusion that rationality cannot compete with effects. According to him, the left is losing because it is not working on developing a regime of effects that is stronger than the ones that already exist. In his book, Notre Joie, Our Joy, Bégodeau tells the story of a fan as he introduced himself, who invited him to get a drink and happened to have far-right ideas. Bégodeau is known to be left-wing, by the way. Their discussions made Bégodeau realize that racism, misogyny, and other forms of diminishment of one's humanity lie in a powerful effect, almost an erotic effect of subordination. He believes that no rational discourse can fight against that. Only more powerful counter-effects can. Let me give you another example, inspired by philosopher Simone Weil. In the fight against discrimination of all sorts, liberal democracies have institutionalized human rights in the language of rational laws. That means that we legally force individuals to see others as human beings. We have regulated or forbidden the expression of negative effects, like racism, sexism, homophobia, in the hope of cancelling them forever. But we haven't cancelled them. They remain. They express themselves in more insidious ways, in metaphors, in coded languages, dog whistle. Someone like Bégodeau might say that we have lost the effects war. We haven't been able to find a strong enough counter-effect and resorted to the justice system instead. That is partly true. I say partly because it'd be wrong to say that we haven't tried to forge counter-effects. Sorority is one example. It seeks to empower women and resist patriarchy. So the problem isn't so much that we don't have positive counter-effects. We do have a lot of them. The problem is that affects are conditioned by the society we live in. As philosopher and economist Frédéric Lordon explains, quote, "There are individuals and they experience effects on an individual level, but those effects are nothing else than the effect of the structures in which individuals are immersed." In a society, our society, that is based on classification, subordination, and power, it is not surprising that acts of racism, misogyny, homophobia create this sort of erotic effect. They make the racist, misogynist, or homophobe powerful, edgy, and can make him come in just a few seconds. It's really, really powerful. Jokes aside, that is why the phrase common sense is more often used by conservatives than by progressives. Common sense appeals to biases that comply with the structures of the societies we live in. Now, looking back on history, there have been times where it felt like the tables turned. In 1776, Thomas Paine published Common Sense, a pamphlet directed at common people of the colonies and advocating independence from Great Britain. It was sold, distributed, or even read aloud in taverns and meeting places. It asserted that common sense is firmly on the side of the people, but historian Sophia Rosenfeld showed that the pairing of, quote, common sense and republican governance as anything more than wishful thinking or rhetorical masterstroke on the part of Paine. For most of history, and indeed even in North America in early 1776, the opposite was surely the case. The direct rule of the people was deemed an obvious recipe for disorder, instability, and worse. End of the quote. More recently, François Ruffin, the rising star of the French left, has been reappropriating common sense and effects to push for progressive values. He regularly tells the story of working class people and the oppression they face on a daily basis to appeal to listeners' emotions. I'm smiling because it has become a bit of a meme, to be honest. Now, it's difficult to measure if this strategy is successful, but he's determined to win back the working class electorate who turned to the far right in the past decade. So that leaves us with one last question. Can positive counter-effects revolutionize society? Or do we need an entirely new system for those effects to grow? I tend to be quite skeptical about the let's fight back with their tool strategy. So the strategy used by Thomas Paine, by François Ruffin, because, reappropriation can be emancipatory, but deep down I feel like it only legitimizes the tools of the other side as a basis from which we can organize our own fight. What I mean is that, as we established, that common sense is a valid basis from which to draw popular support, from which to establish truth. then we have to accept that others do it and that they might be better at it than us. Instead, I sincerely believe that we have to find new ways to galvanize people, to get their attention. Adopting the other side's strategy doesn't sound like a good idea. It's reactive, it's not proactive. In a similar way, hoping that people will unanimously separate effects from rational thoughts is ambitious and maybe not something we should desire. I mean, remaining unaffected and 100% rational all the time sounds a bit boring. It sounds a bit too centrist for me. We do not want a world dictated by Excel documents and PowerPoints, don't we? So no, I don't have a specific idea of what we'd need to do, but that is precisely when imagination comes into play. Philosopher Simone Weil talked about a higher good, positioned above the individual, a sort of secular God that would guide our actions to favor collective well-being over the defense of individual interests. By the way, I didn't talk about religion as a way to achieve truth, but of course it's something that people have used and continue to use for that purpose. Weil is inspired by that in a way, but she makes it secular. She detaches it from an institution. It's not incarnated by a person or an animal. Others think about how to change the organization of space to see if it also changes people's relationships with one another for the better, to see if it changes the effects to which they respond positively. That's the philosophy behind the 15-minute city, or the ZAD, Zone à Défendre, which are spaces occupied by climate activists, especially anarchists, that look like little villages. I mean, many things can be done at various levels, local to international, including your own imaginative brain level, so turning to doomism doesn't make any sense. Now I'm really curious to hear if you've ever thought about those ideas and what you think we should do to spread progressive values in a way that doesn't become elitist, but also in a way that doesn't legitimize the strategies of our opponents. I'll continue to think and talk about all of that as well. I'm very conscious that video essays aren't accessible to everyone and that they can sound a bit elitist due to the language we use, etc. But keep in mind that the concepts and ideas I presented in this video are already simplified and arranged in a way that makes sense in our modern world. But yeah, the video isn't an end in itself, it's rather like a question mark, and you can provide answers by taking the ideas articulated here and turn them into something that makes even more sense for you and the people around you. I like the idea of working on different levels, and I don't think that those videos are less effective than, let's say, going door to door to convince people to join a political campaign. I feel like some work better with abstract ideas and concepts that they then materialize in concrete stuff like a poster or a movie or a local movement, and others better connect with an idea when it makes sense in their lives, so when it's very pragmatic. Convincing people then comes down to understanding what sort of discourse better work for them and providing that. As an example, it does not make sense to throw abstract concepts and ideas at someone who doesn't have a structural vision of society. And on the other hand, some need concepts to situate themselves and understand who they are, who we are. So yeah, I guess that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, the conversation continues in the comment section. Don't forget to like, to subscribe if it's not already done. I would like to thank my patrons for their support, and a special thank to top tier patrons: Joey, Ivan, Jason, Trebizond, Corrigi, Remy, Tristan, Patricia, Christopher, Ian, Donage, Alex, Edwin, Ren, Sam, Manuel, Alexi, Benjamin, and Perry. Now, before I leave, I need to talk to you about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. You can create your own website around your preferred aesthetic from a catalog of templates and use it as a landing platform for all the activity you do: YouTube, online shop, blog, podcast, photography, etc. Once that is set up, you can connect all your social media accounts and share content between different platforms. Squarespace can also help you create effective email campaigns to really connect with your community. Finally, they have this very cool feature where you can connect and learn from other creators like Adrien Raquel, who will show you how you can best use the platform. If you feel like Squarespace is made for you and you want to check it out, go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you've experimented and you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/alice.cappelleyt to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring the video, and yeah, I'll see you very soon. Salut! So I have the list of top tier patrons there, and Camilla Cabello was one of them. She has been supporting the channel for a very long time now, but I've just discovered that she's not a patron anymore, and I don't know, that makes me a little bit sad. My theory is that Shawn Mendes is behind that,